Hello and welcome to the final video for the second week of Ethical Issues in Computing and Technology Winter 2024. We have two kinds of written assignments this semester. One of them is the reading and video checks that happen several times a week, and the other is the informal essays. There are two of them. They replace the midterm and the final. The first one will be about the concepts we learned about in the first 2 weeks, and the second one will be about the things we cover in the second 2 weeks. So every single weekday in this very short semester is supposed to be an entire week's worth of work. In practice, that might be tough to do, but we do cover a lot. And with this assignment, I don't want you to just focus on single individual concepts, but instead multiple ones to get a sort of more robust view, some comparison and contrast, and critical analysis. So I want you to, 1, do that with other people's arguments, 2, convey this analysis, comparison, and contrast in your own words as clearly as you can, and 3, use those same skills to build an argument yourself. So the homework questions should give you a core, a basis to start for numbers 1 and 2. We've done some analyzing already. I don't want any copying, pasting directly from your homework to your essay, but you can certainly use the understanding that you built as part of the body of your essay. So what kind of essay is this going to be? It is an argumentative essay, meaning you need to take a point of view. That's your main idea or your thesis. It doesn't have to be a big, that might be a scary word. It doesn't have to be a big, huge viewpoint to defend. It can be very, very modest and small. In fact, it should be. So here's an example. If you decided to write about privacy, like we talked about today, you might argue that the government should provide more protection for consumer data. Remember, everything we talked about was just about the federal government not infringing on your privacy or what they can do when they want to collect your data. There's little to no regulation about what businesses can do. And maybe you think the government should have some regulation in there, or maybe you think there should be less. Either way, you're taking a point of view. You'd also notice that the Reynolds was published in 2014. You need to get a few updates. I am going to post links on Thursday that hopefully will give you some supplemental information on whatever topic you choose. Another way you might approach it is to think about a comparison and contrast between the United States and the European Union. That's an angle that was taken in our book. A third idea you could do with the privacy is the normative versus the legal. We remember that the legal aspects aren't necessarily the moral and ethical aspects. They are what we have come up with to try and protect particular rights. A normative idea is the moral idea, what ought to be, what should be, versus what is. What is the fact of the matter. What ought to be is the morality or ethics of the issue. So you might say, here's what we do legally, but that's not moral enough. We should be doing this instead. So we got 3 potential thesis statements right there already. If you're having a tough time deciding on a topic, here is a guideline to follow. Your thesis statement or main idea should be provocative, unambiguous, modest in scope, and assertive, or PUMA. Provocative in this instance means it should be about an issue that can be debated. Facts are not like that. A book report is not like that. Saying the moon is the Earth's satellite is a fact. It's not a provocative statement that can be debated. If you say something like televisions are devices with which entertainment programs can be viewed, you're describing something. You're not arguing about it. You're not trying to prove or disprove a conclusion. Unambiguous means that you state your intent clearly, directly, and it can only be interpretable in one way. If you use an ambiguous or vague word, make sure you define the way that you're using it. Take out the vagueness. Modest in scope is one that students constantly struggle with. If you make a gigantic claim about an entire category of things, it's very unlikely that you're going to be able to provide enough evidence and argumentation to support that kind of claim. So a lot of times online we'll see people say things about all men or all women, and that would take a whole lot of evidence. There are roughly 3.5 billion of each, and to say something about all of them could take an entire thesis, an entire book, an entire lifetime of study, and you probably still might not even get there. Whereas, if you say something like, women or men under age 18 from Kings County, when surveyed, say, and that's a very small, modest thesis that you can prove or support with evidence in a very short document. Because if you just say that, it might be a survey that you went out and did. So you have the evidence to try and prove that. Or if you say something more relevant to this class, like intellectual property is an idea that never works. Never is a huge, huge claim. Think hard about what you actually can say given the evidence that you're going to use. If you wanted to talk about some of the flaws in intellectual property, you'd say instead something like, intellectual property as a concept has a flaw that deserves further investigation. That flaw is. And then you'd say what you're arguing. Final one, assertive is the other side of the provocative coin. You're talking about an issue that can be debated, and you are taking a side. You're not describing both sides. You're saying which one is stronger and why. So then once you have this topic, how do you organize this essay? In the introduction, you tell me what you're writing about and how you're going to write about it. And it's about one paragraph. Dive straight in. Here's an example. I'm going to discuss privacy with relation to computing and technology. I will argue that the regulations in the United States are deficient when compared to the regulations in the EU. I will highlight major legislation from each entity, compare them, and demonstrate that the EU regulations do a better job of protecting private data. That is a nearly perfect, straightforward introduction to a short, informal essay. The body is where you use your homework, where you'll actually explain the legislation, you'll actually compare it and contrast it. You've already done a little bit of this work, so that should give you a little bit of a leg up, and that should be 1 to 3 paragraphs. Then you do your conclusion, where you do your own argument. Sum up, show which evidence is stronger and why, and state your claim. But what is an argument? Rational logical arguments provide evidence or premises for a conclusion. The evidence that you use needs to add up to provide good support for the thing that you are claiming is true or should be believed. So your evidence has to be relevant to the conclusion and it has to show step by step how it proves your point. Here's a generic version of how it works. Premise, evidence, those two add together and become the conclusion. But here's how I grade these 4 things. Does the student demonstrate an adequate connection to the material? Meaning at least 3 bits of information that we studied are mentioned and explained. I say bits of information because if you're talking about one particular thing like privacy, you're not going to go talk about freedom of expression in that as well. But you do have to talk about maybe 3 pieces of legislation or something along those lines. That's 15 points out of 50. Is there an argumentative thesis? 10 points. Does the thesis follow PUMA to a reasonable degree? 5 points. And finally, the bulk. Is the thesis well supported with evidence from the course material? So number 1, adequate. means you did the bare bones. Number 4 means well supported. You're thorough. You went above and beyond the bare bones. Or, do not claim something without evidence, without explaining. And that's it. Now, this, of course, is not a term paper. You do not have that much time. You have, let's see, 3 days, because the slot opens Thursday morning, and then it's due Sunday night. You're probably not going to get to do much more than a first draft plus a read-through. That's why I give you this sort of tip, which I found helps, where you read something aloud to yourself, which shows you where you're being awkward. Give yourself at least like 10-15 minutes after you're done. I'm not going to grade on grammar unless your grammar is so poor that I cannot understand what you are trying to say. So we need clarity. We do not need perfection. If you make a few minor mistakes but still demonstrate that you are working through the ideas and trying to build your own argument, that's fine. And as always, you can email me with questions or concerns, and I will see you in the next set of videos on Thursday.